Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Shaw, once again, flying solo. For you Womack fans out there, we will have her back. I promise you, she's a very busy lady, and I don't do much of anything. But that's neither here nor there. That's not why we're here. We're here for Chapter 7. We are in the final unit of our AP government journey, and this unit is going to really focus on linkage institutions. And again, remember, linkage institutions from past discussions are really anything that links the people to the government. So this chapter is specifically about the media, but there's others, again, things like interest groups, campaigns and elections, political parties, and really all of those kind of together make up all of these linkage institutions. So let's get into it. Mass media. Here we go. So we're going to have only 5 learning objectives today. Again, we'll go through them chronologically, so I'm not going to go over them here, but if you'd like to write them down, feel free. So 7.1. The mass media today. Describe how American politicians choreograph their messages through the mass media. All right, so when we started this country, there was virtually no media. There was a few newspapers, but the idea of like daily news, that was really not, it was a really foreign concept to the founders. So they didn't have to deal with that at all. Even upwards into like the late 1800s and early 1900s, there was not this idea of the media that was a daily thing. And we see the development of daily newspapers, especially right around the turn of the century. But Franklin Roosevelt, who was president during the 1930s and the Great Depression, he practically invented media politics. So he is, again, going to kind of use things like the radio to get his message out to the people. And newspapers had been doing that. Again, they would publish speeches that the presidents gave or that congressmen gave in the newspaper, and that was again the main way that the government connected to the people, and vice versa. But that wasn't really, again, it wasn't really considered like this giant beast that it is today until Franklin Roosevelt had kind of turned it on its head. And what you know, though, is like we live in a much different world, so it's obviously going to be a lot different. But the interesting thing about the media is that up until the late 1960s, there was a really cozy relationship between the media and the government. And what changed was all these really horrible things that were going on, and that the government was kind of like hiding from the people, and it really led to a kind of a general distrust and in government, and it led the media to kind of take on this adversarial relationship with government. So things like the Vietnam War and Watergate are two of the main things. But there's a lot of other things too, like the Iran-Contra affair in the 1980s, stuff like that, all kinds of stuff. So this is going to lead to what's known as investigative journalism, which you guys probably know, but in general, it's the use of reporting to unearth scandals, scams, and schemes. And guys, this is what is so important about the media today, is that they are looking for things that are going to interest people. Like, you're not really going to see a lot of stories that are going to be boring, because nobody watches something that's boring unless you're interested in it. So that really alone is probably the most important thing to remember from this entire unit, is that there has been a giant shift now away from just reporting the news as we understand it to reporting the things that are going to be most exciting for people to watch. And we'll get more into that later. The news coverage, kind of as a side effect here, news coverage of presidential candidates, people who are actually running for office, are now a lot less favorable. And you're going to see that especially now that we're coming to the 2020 election. Republicans are going to try to do as much as they can to kind of find dirt, and especially Republican news channels like Fox News, they're going to try to find as much dirt, any like scandals or anything in the past of a lot of the Democratic candidates that are going to be running against Trump in the 2020 election. But again, we'll see kind of how that plays out. So again, we start with the print media. Newspapers are really the first version of the media that we see. And what's interesting about it is that since from not the founding, but from the origins of the Constitution, so like in 1787, and then later on in 1791, we see that with the passage of the Bill of Rights, the media has always had free press. So they have really had the freedom to operate in their own realm, and not really ever been forced to be censored. or censured. So that's really important to know, is that newspapers in America, and really the media in America, has always operated with a lot of freedom and then autonomy. So we know actually that people that read newspapers are actually much better informed than people who generally will just like watch TV or listen to the radio even, because there's a lot more information in a single newspaper than you can cover in a couple minute long story, either that's on the radio or the television. So people who read newspapers are much better informed. However, the circulation and the sales of newspapers has declined drastically. So that's really important, and newspapers are really trying to kind of adapt to survive, and you see that a lot of them are going online now, like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, like all of these have really vibrant online forces with them. But the problem is that you still have to pay for a lot of them. And when you have to, you have to pay, I guess, for like cable TV, but you don't have to pay for regular nightly news, and you can get a lot of the same sort of stories. So that's, again, there's still an issue there. But again, remember, all of these media sources, they have to make money, and they have to make money either from subscriptions or they have to make money from advertisements. And because they're all privately owned, and privately owned businesses, their goal is to make money, essentially. And again, I am harshly generalizing here, because I'm sure that there are some very well-intentioned news media like CEOs and owners out there. But at the end of the day, if it's not profitable to do the thing that you're trying to do with your business, you're not going to do it that much longer. So that's, again, a really big idea that you need to kind of keep in your head as we go through this. Again, so the next two things that emerged, or the next two tools of media that emerged, were going to be the radio in the 1930s, and then television is going to be post-World War II, like late 40s, early 50s. And again, these were really important at the time. Again, everybody had a radio in the 30s and 40s. TVs, as they became more or like less expensive, a lot of people are going to have access to that, and that's going to lead to these nightly news news segments. Cable television is going to kind of rise in the 1980s. Again, like subscriptions that you're going to have to buy. And what's interesting about those is that it's going to kind of create this like golden age of network news. But the problem is that this is going to come to an end kind of with the advent of the internet, which is the final source of news media. We still have cable news, but the times when there's like really famous news reporters like Walter Cronkite, who in the 70s and especially was just so powerful. People would watch him on a nightly basis, and he had a lot of influence as a media source. But we've seen that really kind of go away. There are certain people, again, like maybe Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, and then I think the most like Bill O'Reilly before he got fired from Fox News. Like, these are all people who are they still have a lot of influence, but it's not nearly as much as it was. Especially now that we have really kind of been divided along ideological lines. I get ahead of myself though. So with the invention of the internet, we have our final one, as I said, but it's not really the same as these newspapers. We know that newspapers are the best source, but the attention span and just all kinds of other distractions on the internet are really hurting especially young people's ability to stay informed about politics and government. So you need to understand that we're kind of going back here to the executive chapter. But the government is in charge of regulating the electronic media, and specifically they do that with the Federal Communications Commission, which is an independent regulatory agency, meaning it is a part of the bureaucracy. So again, it was created in 1934 to start regulating things like the radio, and then eventually television, and now the internet. So their main goal is to prevent monopolies. They also want to make sure that the stations are going to serve the public interest. So like if you own a station and it is putting out like all these all sorts of like inappropriate things, like if you had been like broadcasting pornography or something like that, the FCC will obviously shut you down because that does not serve a broad public interest. There was also a fair treatment there. So a couple fairness rules that unfortunately they're kind of gotten rid of in the late 1980s. The fair treatment rule is that they had to kind of try to be unbiased, and bias isn't really the right word, but they needed to kind of treat each issue fairly and each politician fairly. So they weren't supposed to favor like certain politicians. Like if there was a Democratic candidate and a Republican candidate, they were not supposed to favor one or the other. They were just kind of supposed to present the issues fairly. And with the end of that, once they kind of repeal that in the 1980s, then we see the rise of like the Fox Newses and the MSNBCs, the ones that are really starkly divided along ideological lines. And this is really what's going to lead us to what's known as selective exposure, which I'll define a little bit later. But this is where people are going to only choose news sources or information sources that align with their ideology or their viewpoints already. And so that has a whole other host of issues, but we'll get to that a little bit later. There is an equal time rule that is still kind of in effect. Like the book mentions that Donald Trump, for example, when he was campaigning for president, he actually appeared on Saturday Night Live, which is on NBC. And so a lot of the other Republican candidates, they wanted to also have, about, I think it was about maybe 10 or 20 minutes. And so they wanted to have equal access to time on NBC. Anyway, so that is still a little bit in effect. But again, the fairness rule is really pretty much gone. All right. So what I kind of want to just break away, talk about a little bit about the shift from broadcasting to narrowcasting. So broadcasting was what was originally done by the ABCs, CBSs, news, and all these different networks. Like they were trying to reach a broad audience, and with the invention of of cable, that is going to that's going to really kind of narrow things down. So narrowcasting in general is media programming that is focused on a particular interest and aimed at a particular audience. Couple of examples for you. Things like, again, I've already given you some, like things like MSNBC and Fox News are going to be, they're news-based, and they are directed at liberals and conservatives, respectively. But there's others, like things like ESPN, that is specifically for people who are interested in sports. If you are interested in like the news of the day, you're probably not going to go to ESPN. That would be probably a waste of your time. So that's kind of what narrowcasting is that on cable, there are channels that are specifically designed to target a certain amount of people or a certain kind of person. And that person is going to be more likely to choose that channel or for whatever they need, whether it's sports or news, what have you. Music, again, things like MTV, all kinds of stuff like that. I guess MTV is probably more about like teen moms. Or is that VH1? I don't know. Anyway, I guess we could say things like, what is it? What does my wife watch? Like the Desperate Housewives. I don't know. Bravo. There we go. We got it. Again, Bravo is going to be like really going for like people who are interested in celebrities. Anyway, I digress. All right. So this is where I wanted to mention selective exposure. Again, that is the process of people choosing to get news from sources that have viewpoints that are compatible with their own. And there's there's some pros and cons to this. The pros are that it might, since it is ideologically tinged, it actually could stimulate involvement, which is interesting to me just because if you kind of find something that corresponds to your own views, then you're going to become more informed about your own views, and it might actually lead you to participate more in politics and government. It also does help clarify what is at stake in policy decisions, and that kind of somebody who is generally uninformed, they could go to something that they technically agree with, liberal or conservative, and then they would be more informed in what is at stake, and what like liberals or what conservatives would face or could potentially lose or gain in these policy decisions. Now, the cons are there's one more con than there is pros. The tone of a lot of these ideological news stations really turn people off. There's like MSNBC is very anti-Trump. Fox News was very anti-Obama, very anti-Clinton. And they're brutal. Like they really don't hold anything back. So again, that could turn certain people off, especially moderates. But make sure you guys know that again, most Americans kind of fall into this moderate category, and that has kind of led to some issues. There is also less trust in the media. If you go to places like allsides.com and you look at different stories from the different websites, that is going to show you that a lot of them are trying to lead their readers or their viewers in certain directions. And so that kind of leads to less trust. But the most important thing is that these news stations like Fox News and MSNBC and even CNN now to some degree, they are less, people who watch them are less able to see the other side. So we just kind of have people that are across a divide now, and they're not really able to kind of weigh other options. And that leads to people who are less willing to compromise. So if they can kind of see the other side, they can understand what the other people want and what they're worried about. That might be able to help people become or reach a certain compromise. But that's not really happening anymore. So again, do with that what you will. Again, this is from a study done. They asked people who believed that they were consistently conservative, all the way to consistently liberal, and they asked them what channels that they watched, or specifically, I think that they had them choose what sources to get the news from. So again, as you can see, people who are consistently conservative, they chose Fox News to get their news sources 84% of the time. Again, and this was in 2014. All the way over to consistently liberal, were more tinged towards CNN and MSNBC. Again, and people in the middle are kind of on all over the place, but this is kind of where we would want people to be. We want people to be more around like sharing these these news sources, because unfortunately there's really not one news source that is just trying to present the issues unbiasedly. I don't think that's a word, but in this case that is leading to other issues that I mentioned on the last slide. So and again, maybe if there was like a government channel that was just going to present the issues. But again, we don't have that. So until that happens, these are going to be privately owned companies that are trying to reach specific audiences. So the impact of the internet it's really hard to measure. What we do know is that information is at your fingertips, but a lot of people aren't using it for that. They're using it for things like pop culture, music, like all kinds of things that we have this unbelievable source, that people, your generation could be more informed than any other generation, and probably is in a lot of ways more informed on certain things. But when it comes to politics, your generation, even my generation, to be honest with you, is really lacking when it comes to that. The internet does facilitate communication in all directions. So with the advent of political campaigns, they can now use the internet to create websites where people can go and donate directly, or they can go and ask questions directly, bring up issues or concerns, and the politician can answer those questions directly on the website. All kinds of things. And also with the advent of blogs, these politicians can put out an article or something about a certain issue and send it out, put it on their website for all their viewers to see. And it's a really, even like Twitter blows my mind, because there are, I could tweet out right now and I could potentially get somebody who is very famous or somebody who is in government to see my question, and they might answer it. Who knows? I mean, so that's kind of just the amazing impact of the internet. Unfortunately, it's really not being used to its full potential, and we might never see that. Hopefully we do, but again, time will tell. So I've already mentioned this a little bit, that we have private control of the media. And there are a few public stations, so things like PBS or NPR. So I guess I misspoke earlier when I said that there wasn't any. There are a few. Their viewership or listenership is fairly low. There are people that listen, but again, they're not really going for that entertainment value, which is kind of what a lot of these stations are focused on, because if you are not entertaining, people are going to turn you off. They're going to change the channel, or they're going to go to a different website. So the private control is really, or the private ownership is really, really vital to understanding media in the United States. And there actually are, like, public control is actually a lot more common in other countries. Again, there are, especially even in democracies, there are government controlled media sources that aren't really even limited. Like in a democracy, like freedom of the press is kind of a universally accepted idea. But you would think that if a government agency was like controlled, or if a government media source was controlled by the government, that they wouldn't want them to like publish bad things about the government. But we don't see that actually happening. Unless you're in a country that is not a democracy, and in that case, like places like China, North Korea, like those are going to be government-owned media sources, and they're also going to be tightly controlled and only allowed to give out certain information. And that's why that says freedom of the press varies, again, kind of accordingly, depending on the type of country or the type of government in a country. So the main goal here, again, is going to be profits because of the private control. And the way to get those profits is going to be either from, like I said, subscriptions or advertising. And even with advertising, there's a lot of other issues kind of like associated with that, because like when you think about it, like you're like, okay, I need to get not like, imagine a news page or like an internet page. Yes, I want you to read my article. However, I also need you to look and potentially click on these advertisements. So if my article sucks and you just don't even scroll down past the first couple lines, you didn't even look at a lot of the ads that are on that website. And that means that I am not going to be making as much money on the internet. For television and radio, it's still about commercials, and but again, they need the news. They need the news that they are reporting, or the stories they're reporting, to be interesting and exciting. Because if they're not, you're going to change the channel before you even get to the advertisements. So it has kind of led us to a decrease in stories that are boring, and an increase in entertainment in general. And again, like I say entertainment, and I shouldn't, like, that's not exactly the right word. Like, yes, we want it to be entertaining, or they want it to be entertaining, but more like so than that, they want it to capture your attention. They want it to be like, so things like violence, unfortunately, are much more interesting than a specific policy that President Trump is trying to pass. And the other effect of this profit orientation is the decline in foreign news reporting as well. So again, do with that what you will, but that is another big issue of private control of the media. All right, so that was all 7.1. The next couple, again, there's 4 more. These are going to fly by, so let's get to it. The first one is reporting in the news. List the major criteria that determine which news stories receive the most media attention. And I can already tell you already know what it is, because I already mentioned it. So there's a couple things you need to understand. We have things called beats. So beats are places, they're specific locations from which the news frequently emanates. Things like Congress, the White House, all of these places are going to generate news frequently, and there are going to be reporters that have these beats, and they are going to be in charge of making sure that they are getting the stories from those locations. Trial balloons are something a little bit different. They are intentional news leaks, specifically for the purpose of assessing political reaction and public reaction. So, for example, with Bill Clinton and his affair, the Monica Lewinsky scandal, like what they did is they actually released it. They gave it to one specific news reporter, and that person reported on it to kind of gauge what the people felt about it and kind of gauge reaction, because a lot of Americans had thought that it was time for him to come clean, to tell the truth about it. And so that's why they did that. They kind of released this trial balloon to see how it would go, and kind of so they can work on the phrasing specifically to make sure that they're kind of portraying or making it, I guess, the least politically damaging as possible. And the thing about the news is that it really, and really the media in general, is that it needs to have a symbiotic relationship with government. It has been much more negative in recent years, but in general, politicians are going to like be more favorable to news stations that treat them more favorably. So again, if they get, it's like kind of like a I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. Like if you give me some screen time, maybe, and like I can give you maybe some more stories, or maybe more positive screen time, I can give you some more interesting stories that are going to help you with your viewership or your readership. And that's really important to note, and that's kind of, unfortunately, since we have been divided ideologically, most places will not really give the most like people who are opposites of, like, you know, liberals and conservatives, they won't give the opposite stations a lot of time, and that's kind of why we see such divisions increasing. So the other issue with this is about presenting the news. So most politicians only get about 10 seconds when they are giving a speech, or even if they are just kind of talking about something in general. News stations will typically only give them a soundbite, which is a short video clip of approximately 10 seconds, and that is pretty much all they show from a politician's speech on the news. And again, you have to remember that a lot of these speeches are probably pretty boring to the average citizen. And the issue with that, though, is that politicians will often ignore really complex issues because they know they're only going to get 10 seconds. So they can't really dive deep into a complex issue that maybe a lot of people care about it, but they might skip over that for other things that are going to be like maybe, I don't know, President Trump's really good at this with like one-liners and saying really controversial things that are going to get him in the news, because he believes that the kind of press that he's going to generate from the things that he says are probably better than anything that any group of people that he might alienate. Like, for example, with the wall, he is going to he's alienating a lot of like Hispanic voters, but he believes that it is helping him in the long run with his base of voters. The other thing, and I kind of already got into this with the complex policy issues, is that politicians can't really present issues because they only get 10 seconds. So if a news story is like, maybe they were going to like have a press conference and they're going to say, hey, I'm going to address this issue, but even that press conference, they know that only about 10 seconds of that's going to get shown. So it's difficult for them to actually present the issues to try to use the media to reach people directly. So they have to look to other sources to do that. But some people believe that should be the media's job, because that is what it used to be in the past. But remember, that was with newspapers, and newspapers are again, go much deeper into issues, but that's not really the case anymore with the internet and then television especially. The last problem is that politicians can really avoid issues, and again, this is just kind of also the same thematically. They can now avoid issues that are maybe a little bit distressing, or maybe that might make them look a little bit negative, because they know that there's only going to be 10 seconds that is actual of the speech or whatever that is actually shown on the news. So they might just skip over things that are kind of unpleasant and go on to other things that are more popular. Last thing is probably not overly important, but presidents have kind of been rebuffed. They've kind of been shunted to cable, and so a lot of the major news networks, or the major networks like Fox, ABC, NBC, CBS, they have, like, again, and I'm not talking about cable, I'm talking about just like the regular channels, and so they have actually kind of gotten rid of a lot of the president's time. They can, like, a station can just flat out refuse to give the president screen time, and that is like a big issue for presidents. Like, President Obama said that he would have liked to have more screen time and liked to have asked for more, but he was worried that people were not going to, or that these stations were not going to give him that time, and would make him look pretty bad. So, like, for example, I think when he was giving a speech about his healthcare system or healthcare proposal, Fox, the actual not Fox News, just the actual channel Fox, they aired like "So You Think You Can Dance" instead of airing his speech. So it doesn't make him look good, and so he kind of avoided certain issues like that in the future because of it. Again, you can see kind of the length of candidate sound bites in 4 different countries. Again, you see that the United States has the lowest, but even in Great Britain, which has the highest, it's only 14 seconds. So that's not really enough to really get the job done, at least from a politician's standpoint, to deal with these more complex issues and to really connect to the people. So the last part about 7.2 is the bias in the news. So I want to spend a little bit of time here because I want to make sure you understand that the media traditionally gets accused of having a liberal bias. And what the statistics show is that for the most part, reporters are they generally do identify as liberal, but you have to understand that it is more about who they are and what they do. These are people that are looking for problems. Like, think about investigative journalists. They are looking for issues. They are looking to bring issues to the forefront of people's understanding so that the people can do something about it. So that, in general, is going to associate more with a liberal ideology. Conservatives want to keep things the same. They don't want to change things. They're usually against change. And again, harsh generalizations here. But liberals are going to be usually more in favor of change, finding problems in society, and then eliminating them. So, does the media in general have a liberal bias? Probably not, but reporters in general probably identify more as liberals than as conservatives. But again, that's going to be because of their background. The bias, though, the actual bias, according to experts, is actually in the bias towards stories that draw an audience. So instead of just presenting all of the news fairly and justly, giving equal time to all of these different stories, they are going to spend more time on issues that people are going to care about. Things are the issues that people are going to be more interested in. Again, especially on TV and on the internet too, you need visual stimulation because that is that's what's going to attract readers, but also keep them. No, again, for example, no talking heads. That means people just having a conversation, or especially on TV, that is going to be pretty boring. A lot of people will turn that off unless they're actually interested in it. But if you see something like violence or different things that are really visually appealing, you are probably going to be more likely to watch that or keep watching that. So just again, did I cut out the? I don't know what happened. I thought I had a chart here of, maybe it's on the next page, but actually it is. I'm going to keep going. Sorry. So 7.3 is going to kind of discuss how the media impacts public opinion and political behavior. And there's really only one major thing to understand. It's that the media is not really as influential at actually affecting public opinion itself. What the media is really good at is an agenda-setting effect. They are going to set the criteria by which the public evaluates leaders, and that's really powerful. What you need to understand is that the media is not really going to change how you feel about somebody, but what they will do is they will kind of set the criteria by which you should evaluate somebody. So they're going to say, hey, here's this information, and you can do with it whatever you want, but this is what we think is important, and then you can kind of make your opinion based off of that. And you'll see that all the time when the media is going to emphasize one event over another. Just think about the last chapter we did, chapter 16. Things like inflation and the unemployment rate are closely linked. But for example, if the unemployment rate is really high, but the inflation rate is really low, a news outlet is going to really change its viewers' opinion of people in politics by which one they choose. If they choose the negative one, they probably don't like the people in power. If they choose the positive one, they probably do like the people, and they want their viewers to know that and to share those views. And again, they're going to focus a lot on, the media in general will focus a lot on misstatements, which will kind of make the people that they are against look bad. Like Gerald Ford was a good guy, and by not a great president, but he made a very famous misstatement in a debate with Ronald Reagan, and it made him look. The media really pounced on it, even though he fixed it in the actual speech that he was giving. But the media pounced on it, and it made him look pretty bad, and it might have eventually cost him the election. All right, so this is what I was talking about. So these are stories citizens have tuned in and tuned out. So the percentage of things that are following closely, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I want you to see just like the first three: the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1986, the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon in 2001, impacts of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in 2005. Okay, and then we'll go, so again, these are a high percentage of people who are following these closely, meaning they are not tuning out when these stories are on. And I'm going to just kind of go down here to the lowest ones. Ethnic violence in the Darfur region of Sudan in 2003. Again, those foreign stories are really going out of a lot of people's minds. Passage of the Communications Deregulation Bill in 1996. FDA's proposal to severely restrict trans fats in foods in 2013. So again, these are stories that are just not sensational, and they are so these media outlets are going to probably kind of dust those under the rug and not focus on those as much. And again, especially when it gets to foreign policy stuff, like the Darfur region is absolutely devastated, and a lot of Americans have no idea because media has chosen to not focus on it. All right, two more sections to cover real quick, and then I will call it a day. So the first up is describe how politicians use the media to communicate with the electorate. So I mentioned earlier about the agenda setting, and this is really the main power that the media has. They help to set what's known as policy agenda. So these are the many issues that are competing for attention from government. We've talked about this a little bit in the past, and this is not, it's different from public opinion, but it is going to help shape public opinion in a lot of ways. So again, all these issues that are competing for the attention of government, they're going to be things like interest groups, parties, politicians, agencies, and they're all going to be pushing for their specific thing to get attention from the government. Again, the NRA is going to be looking for less gun restrictions. Environmental groups are going to be looking for stricter laws to help prevent climate change. And they are all going to be kind of helping to set that policy agenda. And the media is going to play a large role in that, because they are going to, the stories that they choose to run are going to be seen by the people, and the people can contact their government official. And then that's going to show the government official that they need to be focusing on these issues. And the people that are really in charge of doing setting this agenda are called policy entrepreneurs. And they're not really in charge of setting it. They're in charge of influencing it. And it's not even that they're in charge of it. I don't know. I'm doing a terrible job here. I apologize. It's that they have kind of taken it upon themselves to try to influence the policy agenda of government. That's better. Got it. So these are people who attempt to bring attention to an issue. These can be people who are in government, out of government, in an interest group, or just regular citizens that are trying to bring the attention of government to a certain issue. And they're going to depend upon the media for support on this, on these issues. So they're going to try to go get news stories. They're going to try to, get screen time on different news stations, and and in some cases, they're going to, maybe even organize protests that are going to be something that is visually stimulating, that is going to allow people to kind of see that there's an issue and hopefully bring attention to other issues involved that the government should care about and the people should care about. All right, last one is understanding the mass media. You're going to assess the impact of the mass media on the scope of government and democracy in America. All right, so you need to understand that the media, from its inception, has always been kind of a watchdog on government. And what that means is they are always trying to keep politicians in check. We don't want politicians to do things that are inappropriate. And because honestly, there's a lot of stuff that happens behind closed doors in government that we have no idea about. And it's the media's job to kind of minimize those, make sure that there are as few of situations of those as possible, because politicians will know that if they get in trouble, they are probably going to lose their next election, maybe even get impeached and removed from office. So a lot of people actually, and when I say people, I mean actual citizens, they view the media's role as a watchdog as a really positive thing. A lot of people, more people than not, believe that that this criticism of government and criticism of politicians does more good than harm. And unfortunately, I mean, I guess unfortunately or unfortunately, it kind of depends on your view. A lot of reporters hold negative views of public officials, and it's not necessarily that public officials are doing more bad things. I think it's just a little bit easier for reporters to find some sort of info like these bad things that are happening. A little bit easier. It's a little easier for them anyway to find it and report on it than it was in past decades, even past centuries. The other thing is that media is the skeptic. Okay, they are going to constrain the government. They're going to make sure that the government isn't just, running around rampant, and they're going to ask these pressing questions. They're going to make sure that they are really looking out for the interest of the people. At least that is their intended purpose. But what's interesting about it, and kind of getting back to that liberal bias in media, is that they focus a lot on injustice. And when you focus on injustice, that is going to encourage the enlargement of government. Okay, encouraging the growth of government so that the government can fix this injustice and fix these issues. And that is more so ideologically towards the liberal side. The other thing about the media is that it really encourages individualism. There's not really a need for any intermediaries anymore. Like beforehand, if the president wanted to, and beforehand I mean like the turn of the 19th or the 20th century, if a politician wanted to communicate with the people, they needed to do so with in a newspaper, or they'd have to actually go and physically be by people in order to connect with them. But with the TV, they don't have to do that anymore. They can just kind of get on any sort of news network and release a speech, and they can connect with them that way. So there's no need for an intermediary really anymore. Again, I guess the media is technically an intermediary still, but it allows them to reach individual voters. And the internet has also kind of taken that and ran with it. But the other thing that the TV does is that it focuses on individuals. More so than not, television is going to focus on the president, specifically the executive branch, because it's easier to do so. If we focus on all 535 members of Congress, that's going to be a lot of different news stories. The Supreme Court is actually very they're a lot like hermits. Like they don't allow TVs in their courtrooms, and they rarely give interviews as well. So that kind of leads the media to focus on the president and what the president is doing. So that again is going to kind of it helps the president at least, but it kind of hurts individual congressmen and other politicians in government that maybe want to do a good job, but they can't really get those individual connections, at least not on television. Last thing is, I believe this is the last thing. Yeah, look at me. I was right. So what you need to understand, guys, is that information is the fuel of democracy. Unfortunately, what we know is that more information does not equal more competence. We have now more information than ever before, at least more access to this information than ever before. Unfortunately, has not led to increased competence, increased awareness, increased knowledge among our citizens. And media is really superficial by demand. What the media understands is that people don't necessarily want super complicated issues. They aren't ready to sit down and really understand, what these very specific issues are. They've got things that they worry about. They've got to go to work. They've got kids. They've got all kinds of things. So when they if they sit down to watch the news at the end of the day, they just want the highlights. Okay. They don't necessarily want these really complicated issues. But the other thing is that they want to be entertained in some ways. They don't want to, and again, entertainment is not quite the right word. They want to be interested in what they're listening to or watching or reading about. And that is going to drive profits for these private media businesses. And again, that's the public appetite is going to really shape the choices that media makes. And so really at the end of the day, who's to blame for the media being superficial? Is it the media who's making the stories, or is it the people that aren't as interested in the more complicated stories? I'll leave you with that. Guys, it's been awesome. Catch you in the next one. Take it easy.